New York City at 2 a.m. is a two-faced monster. Up high, where Manhattan's skyscrapers pierce the night, warm yellow light spills from multi-million-dollar penthouses. But down on the ground, where the small alleys reek of mold and the distant wail of police sirens echoes, the cold of the East Coast winter pricks the skin of those still awake like needles. Lucas Hayes pulled up the collar of his frayed denim jacket, his breath clouding into a white mist as he stepped out of his battered 2005 Ford F-150. The truck was the last valuable possession he had left, its engine groaning every time it started, sounding like the cough of an old man with lung disease. Luke patted the hood, whispering a familiar phrase. "Hold on, old friend. Don't stall tonight. Annie needs her medicine." Luke was a 35-year-old man with a perpetual smile. He had slightly messy chestnut hair and warm amber eyes, the kind of gaze that instantly made the other person feel trusting. But few knew that behind that stubborn optimism lay a graveyard of dead dreams. 5 years ago, Luke wasn't a cleaner or an Uber driver. He was a promising architect in suburban New Jersey, had a nice mortgaged house with a white picket fence, and most importantly, he had Sarah. Sarah was his first love, his wife, his whole world. But fate in America was crueler than any Hollywood movie. One stormy night on the I-95 highway, a runaway truck crushed their family sedan. Luke survived with a few fractured ribs, but Sarah did not. She died on the way to the hospital, leaving Luke with their 1-year-old daughter Annie and a colossal hospital debt because the insurance company refused to pay due to a technical error in the contract. Before the emotional shock had passed, the financial storm hit. The house was foreclosed by the bank. His architecture career was shattered because of post-traumatic stress disorder that made him unable to hold a pen to draw. Luke plummeted to the bottom of society as fast as a stone dropped down a well. But the tragedy did not stop there. A year ago, Annie, the only light left in his life, began to suffer incessant nosebleeds. The test results at a rundown public hospital struck him like a death sentence: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Since that day, Luke Hayes no longer lived for himself. He became a survival machine. He worked 3 jobs a day: port loader at the Brooklyn docks in the morning, Uber driver in the afternoon, and cleaning crew at night. He learned to swallow his tears, learned to grin widely in front of his daughter whenever she asked, "Daddy, why is all my hair falling out?" He learned to lie. "It's a new superhero haircut, my love." Tonight, his job was at the Velvet Lounge, an ultra-luxury nightclub in the heart of Manhattan, where a single bottle of wine cost a whole month's rent for his Queens apartment. The gentle jazz music had long stopped, leaving only the sound of Luke's mop scrubbing the glossy black marble floor. As he worked, he softly whistled the tune of Journey's "Don't Stop Believin'." It was Sarah's favorite song, and now it was Annie's lullaby. "Just the VIP area left," Luke muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. He pushed his cleaning cart toward the hallway covered in plush red carpet. According to the schedule, the guests should have all left by now. The backstage lounge area is usually used for storing liquor or sound equipment. Luke saw a finely carved mahogany door ajar. Thinking it was a storage room that needed cleaning, he pushed the door open without knocking. "Excuse me, I'm just here to grab the—" Luke's words caught in his throat. The water bucket in his hand nearly dropped to the floor. It wasn't a storage room. It was a lavish private dressing room with soft yellow lights and large mirrors. Standing in the middle of the room, with her back to him, was a woman. She had just slipped her wine-red haute couture gown onto the floor. She was wearing only a sheer black lace lingerie set clinging to her perfect curves. Her porcelain skin starkly contrasted with the black of the lingerie and her long, raven hair cascading down her back. For a split second, Luke's brain froze. His male instinct flared, but was immediately crushed by the fear of an employee. "You're done for, Luke. You're going to get fired. Annie will lose her medicine money." The woman turned around. There was no shriek, no frantic attempt to cover herself. Arabella Vance, the young CEO of the Phoenix Corp tech empire, looked at him. Her face was cold, sharp as if carved from ice. She held a glass of whiskey in her hand, her emerald green eyes sweeping over Luke from head to toe, from his mud-caked safety boots and old khaki pants to his face flushed with embarrassment. Instead of anger, the corner of her mouth lifted into an enigmatic half-smile, a provocative look as if she were waiting to see what this little mouse would do in front of the delicious piece of cheese. "The door wasn't locked," she said, her voice low and smooth as velvet, with no intention of covering her body. Luke felt as if he had been slapped. The shame burned him. He squeezed his eyes shut and retreated quickly, a natural reflex. "Oh God, I'm sorry. I got the wrong room. I swear I didn't mean to," Luke stammered, his voice trembling, not from excitement, but from terror. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. 1,000 apologies." Slam. He slammed the door shut, leaned his back against the hallway wall, his heart pounding fit to burst out of his chest. He gasped for breath, cold sweat breaking. He dared not linger for a second. Luke quickly gathered his tools and fled the area as fast as he could, praying that the powerful woman wouldn't report him to the management. He couldn't lose this job. Annie needed $300 for her blood test next Tuesday. 3 days passed in fear and apprehension, but no termination notice arrived. Instead, an opportunity fell from the sky. The employment agency called Luke, informing him he had an interview scheduled at Phoenix Corp for the position of building engineering team leader. Luke couldn't believe his ears. Phoenix Corp was famous for having the best benefits in New York, especially the platinum health insurance package that covered all cancer treatment costs for family members. That was the lifeline Luke had been praying for the past 2 years. Monday morning, Luke put on the only suit he owned, a thrift store suit bought at Goodwill, slightly too big for his gaunt frame. He tidied his hair, kissed Annie's forehead where she was deeply asleep from medication fatigue, and whispered, "Daddy's going to bring a miracle home for you." Luke excelled in the technical interview rounds. His past experience as an architect helped him see building issues that regular repairmen wouldn't notice. But the final challenge was the nightmare. "Mr. Hayes, please proceed to the CEO's office for the final interview round." The automatic glass door opened. Luke walked into the enormous office overlooking the entire Central Park. Sitting behind the colossal reinforced glass desk was her, Arabella Vance. Still those sharp emerald green eyes, still that powerful smirk. The only difference was that today she was wearing a custom-tailored suit worth thousands of dollars, exuding an aura of authority that made people afraid to breathe loudly. The blood in Luke's veins turned to ice. "It's her. I'm finished." Aura looked at Luke, not saying anything for a full minute. She flipped through his file, then looked up, her gaze drilling deep into his soul. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice alarmingly calm, "your resume is very interesting. A former architect, now working odd jobs. You seem to be a resourceful person." Luke swallowed hard, trying to stay composed. He decided to gamble on sincerity. "Miss Vance, life sometimes takes unexpected turns. I do anything as long as it's honest and helps me support my family. As for the incident the other night, I swear it was an accident." Aura lightly tapped her Mont Blanc pen on the desk. "I don't care about the past. I care about efficiency. I need someone who can keep this tower running smoothly, and more importantly," she paused, a strange glint of amusement in her eyes, "someone who knows how to keep their mouth shut and handle unexpected situations with decency." Luke nodded firmly. "That is my working principle." "All right, you're hired. Salary $85,000 a year with full health insurance. Start immediately." Luke walked out of the Phoenix Corp building feeling like he was walking on air. He wanted to scream in the middle of the crowded New York streets. He had saved Annie. 2 months passed. Luke Hayes became the soul of the Phoenix Corp technical department. He wasn't just a good repairman, he was a great colleague. He remembered the names of every security guard's children. He brought donuts every Friday morning. He fixed the coffee machine in the break room like a flash and always told funny stories about his invisible cat, actually Annie's antics, to make everyone laugh. Luke's optimism spread throughout the tower's boring floors. But the strangest thing was the relationship between him and CEO Arabella Vance. Ara frequently called him up to the CEO's office for trivial reasons. The desk lamp was flickering slightly, the conference room temperature was too cold, or a strange noise at the window. Each time, Luke appeared in his dark blue overalls, toolbox slung over his hip, and a bright smile. He would chat casually with her while making repairs. He talked about finding the best pizza place in Brooklyn, about the beauty of the New York sky after a rain shower. He treated her like a normal human being, not like the ice queen everyone feared. And Ara miraculously seemed to melt a little in that warmth. She started to laugh, rare, genuine laughs. Sometimes employees would see her standing by the glass partition, watching Luke make repairs with a gentle, contemplative look. People in the company started whispering about a modern-day fairy tale between the pauper and the queen. Luke himself began to feel a connection. He admired the intelligence and loneliness hidden behind Ara's glamour. He thought perhaps, just perhaps, she saw the real him too. But New York is not a place for fairy tales. The company's Christmas party was held in the penthouse on the top floor of Phoenix Corp. Champagne flowed like water, and caviar and lobster were spread everywhere. Luke, as the on-duty technical staff, was checking the decorative LED lighting system in a secluded corner behind a large screen. He was about to take a break to text Annie goodnight when he heard a familiar voice. It was Ara. She was standing on the balcony on the other side of the screen, with Julian and Claire, two of her close friends from the old money elite.
Ara. Julian's voice slurred with liquor, full of arrogance. I have to hand it to you. You won this one. That repairman, he's been following you around like a good puppy for 2 months now. Luke froze. His hand tightened around the screwdriver. Claire's giggle rang out. I can't believe it. I thought he'd be all over you in the first week. I mean, a broke guy, dead wife, sick kid, seeing a billionaire in her underwear, he had to jump at the chance to change his life, right? Luke's heart stopped beating. They knew about Sarah, they knew about Annie, and they were laughing about it. Ara's voice cut through, clear and cold, shattering any fragile hope in Luke's heart. That's the interesting part of the experiment, Ara said, her tone like a scientist analyzing a lab rat. I bet you guys $50,000 back at the Velvet Lounge that men are only one of 2 types, overtly primal or hypocrites concealing their ambition. I hired Luke not because he was good. I hired him to see how thick his facade of model father, optimistic man was. The clinking of glasses sounded. Ara continued, every word stabbing straight into Luke's self-respect. He plays the good guy very convincingly, but I'm waiting for the moment he takes advantage of my trust to ask for money or tries to flirt with me to climb higher. He will definitely do it. His daughter is his fatal weakness, and desperation will turn him into an opportunist like every other man. When that happens, I'll win the rest of the bet. You're ruthless, Ara. Julian laughed boisterously, but I like it. A toast to the Ice Queen's experiment. Behind the screen, Luke Hayes' world collapsed for the second time. Not because of the car accident, not because of the cancer, but because his innocent trust had been made a laughingstock by people who had never had to worry about bread for money. The smile on Luke's face vanished. The warm light in his eyes flickered out, replaced by a cold, dark shadow. He slowly stood up, putting the screwdriver away in his pocket. He was no longer the cheerful, easygoing guy who hummed songs. Now he was an insulted father, and the anger of a gentle father is the scariest thing in the world. Luke took a deep breath, suppressing the pain that threatened to erupt into tears, and straightened the collar of his cheap shirt. He stepped out of the shadow of the screen, walking directly into the dazzling light of the party, where the frivolous laughter and chatter still echoed. Luke's sudden appearance was like a ghost gliding across the marble floor. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just his dark blue technical uniform with the Phoenix Corp logo, but the aura radiating around him now made the atmosphere thicken. Julian was the first to see him, The sneer on the trust fund kid's face died. The glass of wine in his hand trembled slightly. Claire's giggle rang out, and Arabella Vance turned around, her emerald eyes wide and staring. For a moment, she saw a completely different man. No longer the cheerful, easygoing Luke, the one who always knew how to defuse tense situations with a witty joke. The man standing before her now had the coldness of an iceberg. His amber eyes, once as warm as autumn sun, now looked at her like a lower life form, something dirty to be avoided. The entire spacious party room suddenly fell silent. The gentle jazz music felt discordant and piercing. All eyes turned to the corner of the balcony, where the tragedy of class distinction was playing out nakedly. Luke walked right up to Era. He didn't yell, he didn't smash things like a man out of control.
His stillness was the most terrifying weapon. He slowly took off the employee badge clipped to his chest, the precious insurance ticket he once considered Annie's lifeline, and gently placed it on the glass table, right next to her expensive champagne flute. The small clink of hard plastic hitting the glass was tiny, but in this silence it sounded like a gunshot. "Miss Vance," Luke's voice rang out, low and steady, without a trace of tremor. "You won the bet. Congratulations. You've proven that money can buy amusement, it can buy servitude, and it can turn another person's pain into entertainment." Era parted her lips to say something, an explanation, an apology, but Luke's gaze blocked all words in her throat. "But you were wrong on one point," Luke continued, his eyes piercing into her soul that was beginning to fracture. "I wasn't wearing a facade. I smiled, I told jokes, I worked like a dog, all because I wanted my daughter to see that no matter how cruel this life is, her father always finds hope. I sold my labor, my sweat, even my self-respect to clean up your garbage, just to trade it for her life." He paused for a moment, glancing at Julian and Claire with utter contempt, then turned back to look straight at Era. "You can own this whole tower, Miss Vance. You can buy anything you want, but you are poor. You are pathetically poor in character and kindness. You saw a drowning father and you threw him a lifebuoy, not to save him, but to watch him struggle for fun." "Luke, Era whispered, her voice fractured, feeling smaller than she had ever had in her life. "Don't use my name," Luke interrupted, turning his back coldly. "Keep your dirty $50,000. Keep this desirable job. I would rather my daughter live in poverty but be raised by a father with dignity than have her life depend on the charity of those who treat human lives as a game." Luke walked away. The sound of his safety boots striking the floor was firm and proud. He walked straight to the elevator door without a single glance back, leaving behind the luxurious lights and a powerful woman who was completely devastated. The aftermath of that night came swift and brutal like a winter storm. Leaving Phoenix Corp meant Luke lost the full health insurance package. In America's expensive healthcare system, this was a death sentence hanging over any cancer patient. The bills from the hospital began to flood in. Chemotherapy drugs, blood tests, hospital beds. The long strings of numbers were dizzying to anyone who looked at them. Luke returned to the living hell he had tried to escape, but this time it was tenfold worse. He worked like a madman. At 4 a.m. he was at the Fulton Fish Market unloading freezing seafood crates, his chapped hands bleeding from the ice and sea salt. At 10 a.m. he rushed to a restaurant in Hell's Kitchen to wash dishes, standing for 6 continuous hours in a scorching kitchen steeped in the smell of grease and leftover food. At 6 p.m. he picked up his truck and started his Uber shift, which lasted until 2 a.m. the next morning. He ate cheap convenience store sandwiches and drank bitter black coffee to stay awake. His body visibly wasted away, his cheeks sunken, his dark eyes deeply shadowed. His old clothes became even looser on him. But the most heartbreaking thing was that every time he returned to his dilapidated Queens apartment, where the smell of mold and the neighbors' arguments seeped through every crack in the door, Luke had to put on his cheerful mask. "Daddy, you're home!" Annie weakly cheered from her small bed. The little girl was frail, her translucent pale skin showing visible veins, her head wrapped in a pink wool scarf. Luke suppressed the throbbing pain in his back and put on the brightest smile he could manage. He hid his calloused, cut hands behind his back so his daughter wouldn't see. "Hello, my princess. I had a great customer today. He gave me 5 stars. He picked Annie up, light as a dried leaf. He told her made-up stories about adventures in the city, about dragons hiding in the subway tunnels, about glass castles. He did everything to keep the flame of hope in her eyes from ever going out, even as his own flame was fading daily. Meanwhile, across the city, in her penthouse overlooking the dazzling lights of Manhattan, Arabella Vance was going through her own hell. Luke's departure left a strange void at Phoenix Corp. The coffee machine was broken again, and no one knew how to fix it. The conference room air conditioning fluctuated between hot and cold. The security guards no longer received donuts on Friday. But most of all, there was a deadly silence in Ara's soul. She couldn't focus on the financial reports. In her mind, Luke's eyes that night kept replaying, eyes filled with contempt, disappointment, and immense pain. His words haunted her in every sleep. "You are pathetically poor in character." For the first time in her life, Ara realized how meaningless her wealth and power were. She had insulted the kindest man she had ever met, a man who had treated her like a person, not a money machine. Guilt gnawed at her every second. Ara tried to make amends. She secretly sent a check for $100,000 to Luke's address under the name of the Former Employee Support Fund. The check was returned the very next day, torn in half. She sent expensive gifts for Annie, toys, comics, designer clothes. All were returned unopened. Desperate, Ara decided to go to him in person. She found the address of the run-down Queen's apartment complex. Standing in front of the peeling wooden door, Ara felt more nervous than any multi-million-dollar negotiation. She knocked. The door opened. Luke appeared, so gaunt and haggard that Ara barely recognized him. He was wearing a grease-stained tank top, holding a frying pan with a half-cooked meager dinner. When he saw Ara, his eyes darkened. There was no welcome, no surprise, only exhaustion and disgust. "Luke, Ara stammered, holding out a thick envelope. "I know you're struggling. Annie needs medicine. Please take this money. Think of it as me making amends. I can't sleep thinking about—" Luke looked at the envelope of money, then looked straight into Ara's eyes. He wasn't loud or angry like the last time. This time, his rejection was much colder and more decisive. "Do you think money can buy your conscience peace?" Luke asked, his voice hoarse. "Do you think you can throw money in my face again and everything will be fine?" "I just want to help Annie," Ara pleaded, tears welling up. "Please, don't let your self-respect make the child suffer." Luke gave a bitter, mirthless laugh. "Self-respect is the only thing I have left to teach my daughter, Miss Vance. I would rather work myself to death to earn every clean dollar than have her grow up knowing her life was saved by the dirty money of someone who treated her father like a joke." He stepped back, reaching for the door. "Go home and never come back here," he said, his voice sharp. "Don't let my daughter see you. I don't want her to know there are people in the world as cruel and hollow as you." She deserved better than that. The door slammed shut right in Ara's face. The sound of the bolt being thrown cut off all connection between the two worlds. Ara stood motionless in the dark, dirty hallway, the smell of cheap food and cigarette smoke stinging her nostrils. She held the envelope of money in her hand, feeling it heavy and useless as a stone. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She had lost him. And worse, she realized she was the villain in an honest man's life story. Inside the door, Luke leaned against the wall, sliding down to the floor. He covered his face, his thin shoulders shaking violently. He didn't cry out loud so Annie wouldn't hear. He cried silently, his salty tears soaking his hands. He had just refused the money that could save his daughter's life. Was he a bad father? Or was he protecting his family's last shred of dignity? The question tore at his soul, hurting more than any physical wound. But he knew he couldn't sell his soul again. He wiped his tears, took a deep breath, stood up, and returned to the kitchen, continuing to cook the thin soup for his daughter, preparing for another long night of driving on the cold streets of New York. But then, worse things kept piling up in the life of that lonely, honest man. 2 nights later, the sound of an ambulance siren tore through the quiet Queens neighborhood, replacing the silent despair in the small apartment with antiseptic-smelling chaos at the Mount Sinai Hospital emergency room. Luke stood at the counter, his calloused hands trembling as he scraped together the last coins in his pocket. "Please," he whispered to the triage nurse, his voice broken with fear. "I'll pay the advance tomorrow. Just admit her tonight. She has a 104-degree fever." The nurse looked at him sympathetically, but shook her head, following the rigid rules of the healthcare system. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. The system cannot accept the file without insurance or a deposit." Luke bowed his head onto the cold countertop. Helplessness encased him like an iron net, squeezing him so tightly he couldn't breathe. Not far away, in a secluded corner of the waiting area, Arabella Vance stood hidden behind a large pillar. She had silently followed the ambulance here, but her guilt made her afraid to step into the light to face Luke. She could only stand there, clutching her purse, her heart wrenching as she saw the shaking shoulders of the man she had so cruelly hurt. While Luke was desperately arguing with the medical staff, Annie sat alone in her wheelchair at the top of the ramp for the disabled. The little girl, delirious from the high fever, saw her old teddy bear drop to the ground. It was the only keepsake left by her mother, Sarah. "Teddy," Annie murmured, trying to lean forward to pick it up. The sudden shift in her center of gravity made the wheelchair lose balance. The already loose wheel lock couldn't withstand the weight. "Look out!" someone screamed. Luke spun around. Annie's wheelchair was rolling, picking up speed down the ramp, and right at the bottom of the ramp was a metal medical supply cart with its lid wide open, full of sharp, unsorted surgical instruments. "Annie!" Luke screamed, lunging towards his daughter like a mad beast. But the distance was too far. He wouldn't make it in time. Just then, a flash of white darted across his vision. Arabella Vance didn't think. Human instinct surged stronger than any calculation. She threw herself out, cutting across the wheelchair's path just before it could collide with the medical cart. A sharp metallic crash echoed, silencing the entire hospital lobby. The wheelchair slammed into Ara with immense force. She fell backward, using her entire back to hit the sharp edge of the supply cart as a cushion to protect Annie. Both tumbled onto the floor. In that moment of chaos, Ara still managed to wrap her arms tightly around Annie's small head and body, tucking her against her chest. The space was absolutely silent. Only heavy, ragged breathing remained. Luke slid to his knees beside the messy pile. His heart stopped beating. Annie lay safely in Ara's arms, scared but completely unhurt. But Ara was different. Blood began to seep from a long cut on her forehead, and worse, a dark red stain was rapidly spreading across the back of her pristine white silk blouse, where the edge of the metal cart had cut her. Ara winced in excruciating pain, her breath catching. But when she opened her eyes and saw Luke, the first thing she said was not a cry for help. She looked down at the child in her arms, gently stroking the baby's sparse hair. "Annie, are you okay? Does anything hurt, sweetie?" In that moment, the solid wall of anger and wounded pride in Luke completely crumbled. He no longer saw an arrogant, haughty CEO who scorned the poor. Before him was only a woman with messy hair, a smudged face, and a bleeding body, yet who placed the safety of his daughter above her own life. You're bleeding," Luke stammered, his hands shaking, his hands clumsy, not knowing where to touch without hurting her more. Era looked up at Luke, tears mixed with the streak of blood on her temple. Her eyes no longer held cold sharpness, but only genuine pleading and remorse. "I'm so sorry, Luke," she whispered, her voice choked. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know my money is dirty in your eyes, but please, let me save her. I don't need you to forgive me. I just want Annie to live." Luke looked deep into her eyes. He saw naked remorse and a heart beating with the same anxious rhythm as a parent. He reached out, gently supporting her shoulder, carefully avoiding the wound on her back. "You just saved her life, Era," Luke said, his voice low, gentle again, but containing a new, deeper respect than ever before. "No amount of money can buy that action. I accept your apology, not because of the money, but because you proved that your heart is not poor as I thought." The doctors and nurses finally rushed over. Luke held Era's hand tightly as she was wheeled onto the stretcher. A handshake that stood as a commitment to mend the rift between two worlds that were never meant to intersect. 3 months later, the CEO's office at Phoenix Corp was bathed in the warm light of the New York sunset. But instead of champagne and caviar, on the luxurious glass desk were 2 large pepperoni pizzas from Joe's, the best common man's pizza joint in the city. Annie, now healthier thanks to the latest treatment protocol fully funded by a charity fund named the Sarah Hayes Foundation, secretly established by Era, was sitting on the floor drawing. She drew a castle with a knight holding a wrench and a princess wearing a white suit. Luke, in his new brand Director of Engineering and Security uniform, sat opposite Era. There was no longer the subservience of an employee to a boss, nor the class enmity. They sat there like 2 kindred spirits who had weathered the storm together. "You know," Era said, wiping a streak of tomato sauce from her lip, an image of normalcy no one would have dared to imagine for her before. "I lost that $50,000 bet back then, but I think I made a huge profit."
Luke raised an eyebrow, his familiar, optimistic smile back on his face, but now it was brighter and more peaceful. "How so?" Ara looked down at Annie, who was humming cheerfully, then looked at Luke with warm eyes. "I lost the money, but I found the human part of me that I thought had long died in this gilded world, and I found true friends." Luke picked up a slice of pizza and gently clinked it against Ara's like a celebratory toast. "Welcome back to Earth, Miss Vance," he winked. "Just call me Ara, Luke. Just Ara." Outside the window, the lights of New York began to blaze brightly, but in this room, the warmest light did not come from LED bulbs or computer screens, but from the connection between 3 people: a great father, a resilient child, and a woman who had learned how to love. The old bet was over, but a new life, more beautiful and humane, had just begun.